Hey Bookends! Welcome to a 10-minute book review. I'm 10. Today's book review is going to be on a sequel to a book that Tu and I did years ago. So this is So Long, Ma. The light's kind of messing it up a little. There we go. So Long, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding by Tom Evans. So the book before this one was Where the Children Play by Tom Evans. So jumping right on in, we like to start off every book review with a star point, as in out of 10 stars, how many stars this particular book garner, and also a rating, as in if this was a movie or a TV show, what would we rate it? Star point, this book is a 10 out of 10. I'm going to leave a link to the original book's rating. The original book turned out to be an 8 because we wanted more. This book turned out to be a 10 because we got more. In the way of rating, as in PG-13, R, things of that nature, this one is definitely a PG-13. The other one kind of teetered in between PG and PG-13. This one's definitely PG-13. I think the original book kind of petered between PG and PG-13 because the protagonist in that one started off at the age of 5, or I should say the rememberings of the protagonist starts off at the age of 5 and then moves upward, as opposed to this one with the rememberings of the protagonist starting from adolescence moving upwards. So one thing to keep in mind about this story, the way to fully enjoy it is you have to imagine that you're talking to an older person that you know, such as a parent. I don't know if you'd want actually to hear your dad saying some of these things. Maybe a grandfather, because you're a little bit removed from your grandfather, but it could be, you know, a dad, or a cool neighbor, or, you know, just someone who survived the 50s and 60s in America, and of course the 70s as well. But you have to imagine that you're having a conversation. This book isn't just a story, it is a conversation. It is sitting down with someone listening to their rememberings. If this was a real person, they would probably be in their late 60s, early 70s right now. Somewhere in that range. Maybe let me see. If they were alive when, how old was our mom when? Yeah, they'd probably be in their late 60s, early 70s, or at least mid 60s. So imagine someone who's like the age of your parents or possibly your grandparents, depending on when your parents and grandparents decide to have kids. And you are listening to them tell a story. So this is not in a first person in the way that you're living through every moment with them as it's happening, or that would be incredibly frightening for some of the things that are happening in this book. Something that I love that the author did with this book, So Long, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, and with the other book, Where the Children Play, he provided the reader with a safe space in between what's actually happening and themselves. Because if you, as the reader, had to live through some of the things that Wesley, who's the protagonist, and Rory, who is his twin brother, had to go through, if you're an immersive reader like I am, that could be quite a feat and very uncomfortable. But the author provides us a buffer in the way of a narrator, as in it's still Wesley, we're still listening to and hearing from Wesley, but we're hearing Wesley from the vantage point of him being grown, and everything that he's talking about is something that took place in the past, and so we know that fundamentally Wesley's okay now. Whatever happened to him previously, he's okay now. So jumping into this book, it starts when Wesley and Rory are adolescents. Mrs. Barnes, their adopted mother, is still no nicer of a person. However, she is a little different with her forms of discipline because, of course, the boys are bigger. So in the first book, they are 5 years old when they're adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Barnes. And she's able to bully them essentially more because they're younger, they're littler, they're weaker, But in this book, they're adolescents, and so she can't exactly manhandle them the way that she did before. So she uses kind of a psychological tactic on them by saying, I know what you did. And I'm going to tell your father, and you're going to get in so much trouble. But I'm not going to tell you when it's going to happen. Maybe next week, could be tomorrow, could be 2 years from now, might be never, but you'll never know. That's the kind of mind game that she likes to play with them. Also, you know, I find it very interesting. I don't know much about the 50s and 60s America aside from the racism aspect of it. That's really the only aspect that I'm versed in. So when it comes to day-to-day living in the 50s and 60s, there are certain things that I weren't aware of that I found out in this book, such as they went to a Lutheran school, Rory and Wesley, and so their family was Lutheran, but they lived in a Catholic neighborhood, and apparently that was a point of contention. Apparently being Lutheran in a Catholic neighborhood, at least among the children, that was a problem. It was interesting that they never actually went to blows, like they never actually got in a physical fight over it, but they did get into arguments and stuff. And I love how even though Wesley and Rory have had not the greatest of lives, they are not beaten down by it, especially Rory. Rory's like, I'm not taking anything from anybody, I don't care. You're gonna serve me something, I'm serving it right back. Wesley is like that to a degree. Wesley, the protagonist, is like that to a degree, but not as much as Rory. This book traverses, I want to say, the late 50s into the 60s, because it goes from when they're about adolescents into about 19. So keep in mind, this is a contemporary fiction, so there's never going to be a, oh my goodness, type moment. Well, no, there will be those. I will say that there won't be any big shocks going through, because remember, this is the life, you know, day in the life of, month in the life of, year in the life of, you know, of a person. So there's not going to be aliens popping up and a dragon coming down. There's not going to be all of that. So keeping in mind that it is a contemporary, expectations have to be tempered towards that. It was interesting that the author added in some aspects of history in his book, because sometimes when people write, this isn't really historical fiction, I'd say more historical contemporary, but they don't always add in actual things that have happened. They just kind of take the era itself and write around that era of time and wherever they are. So there was one point where Kennedy was shot. President Kennedy was killed, and so he's talking about Camelot, the death of Camelot, and how hard that hit his adoptive mother, who was crying and cursing at Oswald, or I forgot the name of the guy who shot Kennedy. You know, it's funny. She said that no one's ever going to remember you. She was cursing at the screen and saying, no one's ever going to remember you. And Wesley was like, you know, he's reminiscing. He's like, you know, and how wrong was she? But it's like, I remember John F. Kennedy, like John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and I know about the Forever Flame and everything he did and about his assassination. I can't remember his assassin's name. Only reason I remember Oswald is because of that little cartoon, that the preschool cartoon that I would watch when I was younger on Nick Jr. The little octopus. I think it was Oswald the octopus, and I'm pretty sure that the person who shot Kennedy was named Oswald as well. But yeah, so they were both right to a degree. If you're from a generation born from the 80s up, it's like, you know, JFK, but the guy who shot him isn't that prevalent in your mind. If you're born from the 70s back, it's like, okay, yeah, you kind of know him because it was still kind of fresh, like a little bit fresh. Because I think he died in 1965 or 1960-ish or something. So if you're born in the 70s, it's still kind of a fresh thing. But born in the 80s and 90s, it's like, you're not that big of a deal for me. Kennedy is a big deal, but the guy who did it's not that big of a deal. Mr. Barnes is still nice, but he's still oblivious to some of the, either he's willfully oblivious, which I kind of believe to a degree, or he's fully oblivious, which I would hope that he is, to things that his wife does to his children. It does, I want to say trigger warning, but here's the thing. If you're reading a contemporary, not like a middle grade contemporary, but like an adult contemporary, then certain things should be expected. Sexual content to a degree should be expected. Some form of violence to a degree should be expected. Some sort of trauma, some sort of turmoil should be expected. So I don't want to put a trigger warning on it because of the subject matter, because he doesn't go into deep detail in regards to the subjects. But I feel obligated to put a trigger warning on it because of people's sensitivities. So trigger warning would be that there is a degree of sexual abuse discussed. There's also a degree of sexual activity between children discussed. And when I say a degree, it's not actual children having sex. It's 7 minutes in heaven or 10 minutes in heaven. Pierre?
Yes.
What is that game called? Something in heaven?
I forget.
Okay, he doesn't remember the game either, but I guess because for our generations, you didn't play 10 minutes or 7 minutes in heaven. It's like, hey, you want to do something? Cool. Let's go do it. We don't need a closet. But apparently there was this game called Something in Heaven where two kids would go in a closet, like a boy and a girl would go in a closet, and they would spend however much time in the closet experimenting with each other. I don't know why would they need a closet and why would they need a timer. I don't get it. But yes, so when I say sexual activity, I mean like that. There's nothing explicit in it. Also, Rory goes through puberty, and not Rory, I'm sorry, well, both Rory and Wesley are going through puberty because they're twins. But apparently it does not take much for a boy going through puberty to blossom. I'll say it like that. So there was a funny part in the book, which I guess, once again, trigger warning, because it has something to do with sex/sexuality. He's climbing up a rope. Wesley is climbing up a rope. I've seen this on television before for like gym class back in the day. And apparently he goes up the rope and gets a hard-on by the rope touching him. I guess the friction. And he said that since that point, not forever, but going through puberty, it didn't take much to get his motor going. He even said he had a dream about dancing with scantily clad girls or something like that, and he woke up and he felt sticky. So, I mean, that's interesting to know that when boys go through puberty, maybe not all guys, but I guess that's a thing, I guess. Also, too, I believe he and Roy were sexually molested by Miss Barnes. Miss Barnes was just a weirdo. She was just straight up. She was. Have you ever just read a book and you just wished a character would die? Like, it's bad to wish death on actual people. But if you just read a book and just wished that she would die, and it's like, I don't understand her deal. She was very unkind towards Wesley and Rory. And yet there was a time when they were in basketball practice and there was a blizzard and the bus didn't come to get them, like public bus didn't come to get them. And as they were walking home in despair, they saw her car because she was driving up to come get them. And it's like she didn't necessarily have to do that, but she did it. But then in other cases, she sexually molested him, which I'm not going to really go into. But yeah, she's she's a weird one. I have no sympathy for her. I have very little understanding for her. It seems to be that Rory and Wesley don't particularly like her, but she is the lesser of the two evils. So he can remember being in foster care a little bit before being adopted. And Wesley just has this sense of, as bad as things are with her, they could be infinitely worse with someone else. So that is interesting. You know, things are bad with this woman who's an alcoholic, but the general feeling is, yeah, I mean, this is hell, but it's not the seventh gate of hell. This is only the first gate. So the first gate is way better than the other. The flames get hotter the further down you go. Kind of a situation. Also, Penny is mentioned in this again too. Penny is their sister, adopted sister. And it's interesting that they know so precious little about Penny. It's like they'd be outside doing whatever chores they had to do outside and outside playing, but Penny would be inside. They know very little about Penny, even though they live with their sister. Like, she's a human being living in the home with them. And I was thinking, that's weird. How do you know so little about your sister? Like, she's right there with you. But then thinking about the times, like back in the 50s and 60s, there was a very heavy demarcation between boys and girls, a heavy demarcation between the sexes as to what it is the expectations were for the both of them. So I would believe that after a certain age, since those expectations were so heavily enforced, that the girls wouldn't be allowed to play the same games with the boys, and that the boys would have no want to be around the girls learning how to do housework and playing with dolls. This is what I'm assuming, although I can't 100% say for certain, because one, I wasn't around in the 50s and 60s, and two, our protagonist Wesley can only speak from the vantage point of what it is he knows, which is his life with Rory. This book ends with them being 19. So they go from adolescent to adult. And to hear him tell it, things weren't as bad as it was when they were younger, but as the person on the outside looking in, there is no gradient that shows with Mrs. Barnes' activity with them. There's also no gradient that shows when it comes to Mr. Barnes' activity with them. Mr. Barnes has remained the same all-American dad who takes them to work with him sometimes, who takes them to baseball games, things like that. He's remained the all-American dad that he's always been. Mrs. Barnes has remained the psychopath that she has always been, who uses subtle acts of kindness to cover over continual acts of cruelty. So it's interesting to see from the eyes of the abused saying it's not as bad as what it was, as opposed to the eyes of someone on the outside like, nah bruh, it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. I would really like to see this book as, I'd like to see it as I guess as a TV show, as one of those limited series TV shows. I am happy to say that at the beginning of the book, it does say that it is hopefully going to be a part of a multi-book series. So the first book was from when they were 5 years old, like toddlers essentially, to adolescence. The second book is from when they were adolescents to early adulthood, and maybe this next book will take us into them being adults and what happens in their romance lives and things of that nature. I hope that happens. The other book came out 2 years ago, so it's been a 2-year gap in between. Hopefully the third book doesn't take as long to come out. If there is a third book, hopefully the author gets enough reception so that he continues on doing so, continues on making books like this. But yes, that has been a book review for, oh, you know something interesting? I was wondering why the book was called So Long Mom Only Bleeding. And I asked my mom about that. Like, is that a reference to something in the 50s or 60s, and she was like, there was a song that came out. Let me see what. By Bob Dylan. It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding, or something like that. I'm okay, Ma, I'm only bleeding. I'm all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding. Something like that by Bob Dylan. And I'm thinking that that's the reference that the author was using for the reason why it was named So Long Ma, I'm Only Bleeding. I could be wrong, I don't know. But yes, this has been a book review for So Long Ma, I'm Only Bleeding by Tom Evans. If you like what you see, please like and subscribe. Bye, Bookends.